Welcome to Adventures of Alice and Bob, the podcast where we peer behind the server room door and gain root access to the people shaping the world of cybersecurity today, finding out about their journey and the events that have shaped their careers along the way, as well as digging into maybe some of the things that still keep them awake at night. Today's guest is Vincent Scott, the founder and president of Defense Cybersecurity Group, a company focused on bringing critical cybersecurity solutions to the defense industrial base and beyond. As a US Navy veteran, Vincent has had more than 30 years of cybersecurity experience, both afloat and ashore. In his 21-year military career, he worked on a diverse range of military operations, including cyber warfare, information warfare, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance activities, and he served with national intelligence agencies and been deployed numerous times, including combat operations in both Gulf Wars, Bosnia, and Kosovo. After his Navy career, he continued to apply his formidable cybersecurity skill set, most notably leading PricewaterhouseCoopers' North American cyber threat intelligence practice, and later founding Defense Cybersecurity Group in 2020. With a reputation for operational excellence and integrity in cybersecurity, Vincent is really known for his focus on real-world security measures and going beyond mere compliance. So Vincent, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, James. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Whereabouts are you joining us from today?
I am in Pass Christian, Mississippi. So I'm about an hour's drive from New Orleans on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Many people in America don't even realize that Mississippi has a little section that actually touches the Gulf of Mexico. And so I live about 4 blocks from the beach.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great place to be. Still close to the sea as well, as a former Navy man as well. That's always good to see.
And we have a lot of Navy down here. I live right off of the U.S. Stennis Space Center, and there's a number of Navy commands there, and then Navy Seabees. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're construction battalions that were started in the Second World War. They, run bulldozers and build airfields and do stuff. Their headquarters is right up the beach here from us. So there's plenty of military down here on the coast.
That's fantastic. You've still got that connection. And, with such a diverse background and career that you've had, I'm fearful that we're only going to start to scratch the surface of this in our conversation today. But maybe you could start off by sharing a little bit about your background and what led you into the US Navy in the first place.
Yeah, U.S. Navy in the first place, I think I was a kid who really was attracted to the military very young. I remember pulling the encyclopedias off of Grandma and Grandpa's bookshelf and opening to Army, Navy, Air Force, and reading those articles repeatedly and memorizing all the ranks. And, that was when I was 8, right? And so at the time, hey, how do you go? How do you get into the military, right? Well, you join. I had, many great uncles, and my dad served in the Air Force. I had lots of people tell me, well, if you're going to go in the military, go in as an officer. Okay, great. What's the best way to do that? Well, go to a service academy. At 10, I was sort of like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So I did end up going to the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, and was one of their early computer science graduates. I had a programming class in high school, and sort of this new budding IT thing in the 80s, right, was interested in that, and thought computer science would be a major that wouldn't be too hard for me. At the Naval Academy, a lot of things are hard. So, picking a major where I was like, oh no, I can do that programming and not that. I've got that. That's easy. Compared to, some of the other things you've got going on, there's a lot of requirements for your time, right? That's one of the things about the academies is there's not a lot of extra time to study unless you take it out of your sleeping hours. So pick computer science, one of the best decisions I ever made. And honestly, even though that computer science degree is ancient history at this point, I still find myself using it because of its fundamental understanding of computers, computer structures. How does this work? How does fundamental networking work? Really, the basics of that have not changed that much. There's a lot of new stuff, right? But this is fundamentally about ones and zeros and how those ones and zeros move around. That part of it really hasn't changed. And so I find that to be a really great foundation that I sort of built the rest of my career on.
That's fantastic, and probably some of our listeners might not be aware, but the U.S. Navy has such a long history of being at the front of cybersecurity and earlier information warfare. Their history can be traced back to deciphering those enemy signals during the Civil War, and later on, I think it was Captain Safford established the Naval Cryptography Institute or the Naval Cryptological Organization. I'm curious what it felt like being a part of that long tradition and being kind of at the front line of innovation in this area.
What's a great question, James. Navy. So I didn't start off as a cryptologist. I actually went and I was a ship driver, right? A surface warfare officer when I first graduated from the academy. And then when I came up for shore duty, I actually got my shore duty at the National Security Agency and became a cryptologist while I was there. But the Navy cryptologic service is really interesting. I find that history fascinating. So in most countries, like the UK, the cryptologic capability of the company, how you break other people's codes and read other people's mail, which has been going on for thousands of years, right? Lies in their State Department or Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right? That's where that exists in most countries. Well, in the United States, between the First World War and the Second World War, and where there was a lot of cryptologic activity in the First World War, some really fascinating stuff. We had a Secretary of State who said, "Gentlemen don't read other gentlemen's mail." And he shut down the State Department's capability around cryptology. We had this thing called the Black Chamber, Philip O. Yardley, deciphering other countries' codes, that kind of stuff, which goes on everywhere, right? That he got rid of that capability altogether. And both the Army and the Navy in the United States, no Air Force at the time, right? This was in the early days of aviation. Both the Army and the Navy said, man, we can't live without this. And so they started to build on their very small existing capabilities to fill that gap, because there wasn't anything coming on from a big strategic perspective at the State Department. And so as you rolled forward to World War II, it was actually the Army that first broke the highest level Japanese diplomatic codes called Purple. The Navy worked hard to get a Purple machine themselves because there was a lot of inter-service rivalry at the time. Continues to be some, but at the time it was Army and Navy, very separate organizations. And so when we rolled into the Second World War, we actually were reading the Japanese diplomatic codes. And in fact, the war message that went to the embassy, the Japanese embassy in Washington, D.C., that said, hey, burn all your codes, go to the Americans, declare war, essentially say we're out. We decrypted that message faster than the Japanese did. So we actually were reading it before their ambassador at the time. And so then that underlied how we broke codes in the Second World War, right? German and Japanese. We partnered with the British and Bletchley Park, right? And the activities that the British had going on, and then that rolled forward. Rolling forward to today, interestingly, sort of in the 80s, around the time I was graduating from the Naval Academy, the Army and the Air Force both got rid of their separate military officer career field that did that. And they combined it with intelligence, and the Navy was the only service to maintain a separate cryptologic career. And in fact, they continue to be the only service that has a separate cryptologic officer specialty. And I think that really impacted the Navy's ability to get into information warfare. We actually started the first hacking school in the United States 40 years ago. We really jumped into cyber, and cyber warfare is going to be a really big thing in the future. The Navy cryptologic community led the way for many, many years. I think roll up to today, the Air Force and the Army with their, they both started cyber warfare officer specialties, which is related, but perhaps a little different than the cryptologic field. The Navy for many years has kept those two things together. Congress has just mandated that we break them out. so that we're going to have a Navy cyber warfare field and a cryptologic warfare field in our officer, career fields. So, but yes, the Navy has actually been really cutting edge on the cyber warfare, information warfare stuff for many years in the United States and really in the world.
And I'm assuming, you went in there, you were interested in serving, you were interested in computers, and then you've ended up in this institution with such a long history for that it was a natural progression path for you to start thinking about cyber, about security.
Yeah, absolutely. So when that was on active duty, I like to say I used to play offense, and now I coach defense. Because really on active duty, I had nothing to do with defense. I was complete. Now there are some cryptologic warfare officers in the Navy that we do some defensive stuff. I just didn't have any tours or experience in that. Everything that I did was offense. After retirement, I sort of swam towards cyber defense as the opportunities that were available in the civilian world. Not a lot of offense going on, although I'm a huge fan of cyber letters of marque. So in the United States, in our Constitution, Congress can issue letters of marque and reprisal. Back to the old Navy sailing days, I would love to have some cyber letters of marque, but that's probably a sidebar. So yeah, absolutely. Once I retired, I consciously moved towards a career in cyber, a second career in cybersecurity.
And aside from, you talked about the technology training, that core understanding of networks and ones and zeros and the way things function. What other aspects of your naval experience have shaped the way that you operate today with your business and the way you approach cybersecurity and deal with those, new threats we see coming out all the time today?
Leadership is the technical skill always in shortest supply. I was having coffee with neighbors this morning, and we were talking about this, and I'm continuing to be surprised at how much the people issues really, or at least half my job, if not more than half. How do we lead the team? How do we construct the team? Who are the people that are doing this? Do I have the right qualified people? Many companies, when they talk about cybersecurity, immediately think technology. And really, this is much more important to think about it from a people lens than a technology lens. I would much rather have the best team of qualified people in the world and tell them to go download free stuff from the internet and build me some cybersecurity tools than have the most expensive cybersecurity tools in the world and no team, or a very small, very unqualified team. Really, the people make the difference in this.
That's a fantastic insight there. I think that's, like you say, hugely often undervalued in organizations that are just chasing the piece of software, the box with the blinking lights that's going to solve all their problems. Actually, it's the people that really make a difference.
Yeah, one of the things I've seen in doing, cyber defensive operations and going to lots of different companies, right? Because as we didn't really cover, post Navy, I've worked for Fortune 500, I've worked for a big university, I've worked in a research laboratory, I've worked for Big Four consulting. I've seen a lot of different companies in the last, 14 years. And often, most of the time, by far most of the time, when I go to a company and we start looking at their tool suite and what their tool suite is suboptimized, they're maybe using 5% of the capabilities that are really available to them because they don't have people who know how to use it. They don't have the man hours to know how to use it. They don't have enough people hours to do what they need to do. I remember I went to a major Midwest company. We were talking about their security information and event monitoring system, so their SIM system, which I consider to be the heart of your detection enterprise. And detection is another part of this cybersecurity operation that is very underappreciated. A lot of thought about prevention, not enough about detection. And I was like, we need to really, that's not working like it should. We're not seeing the stuff we should off of it. I was really pushing hard as a Big Four consultant to get in there and, hey, let's open that up and see what's going on underneath the hood there. And finally, the manager that ran that piece of equipment said, yeah, really, I can't, we don't have the people hours to do this. I know that it's not working. We've essentially got it turned down to zero. I've turned off almost all the alerts from it because I don't have on my team the time to deal with alerts because we're doing the firewalls. I got these projects going. We have all these other things going on. There's no time for detecting badness going on in the organization. And so essentially, they had turned the volume all the way down on their piece of equipment, listening for bad things happening in their network. But they were paying for it, right? They bought the tool. They're paying the licensing costs for this. But they turned the real risk reduction value add of this piece of equipment to zero because they didn't also do the people piece of this. How many people hours is it going to take to work the problem when I have this piece of equipment running? Oh, we didn't count for that. It wasn't part of the capital buy. I'm just going to assign it to somebody who already has more than a full-time job. Okay, and then I tell the board of directors, we've got a SIM, we're good. No, you're not, because essentially it's worthless to you because you've turned the volume on it all the way down.
And this is one of the things, working for a vendor, it's a lot of the things that I see when vendors are out talking to people about their products, that thing of, this is going to take a full-time team to manage this product. They need to be aware of these things. All those kind of things very rarely drop into those conversations that people just think they can, buy the piece of software, they've got the tool, and this sort of job's done. Whereas actually, it's so much is in the configuration, the understanding, and just tuning that to your environment, because everyone's seeing different things. There are generic problems out there, but really, people. That's often the thing that is really difficult in whether it's robotic process automation or cybersecurity. Understanding the business processes, what matters most to the business, where you focus that detection and protection around. And I thought it was interesting you mentioned that you've come across a lot of organizations that aren't particularly mature on the detection front because they focused heavily on prevention. And I've often found the opposite of that in many cases, where prevention is a bit like the eat your vegetables of cybersecurity, whereas sometimes people like to think they can go out and buy the detection solution that will solve all their problems sometimes. Maybe we've just, different angles on that.
I think that's very similar, but we just worded it a little bit differently. So I would call what you're talking about fundamental blocking and tackling, right? And there is a dearth of fundamental blocking and tackling. It's not sexy, etc. What I find on, let's call it, certainly will buy detection gear, right? But not actually be using that detection because I don't really want to know that bad things are happening.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yes, certainly.
Yeah. So I've blogged about this, that I think the biggest problem in cybersecurity is the truth we don't want to know. This is hugely problematic. And it has to do with, I think, we normally attach responsibility for cybersecurity stuff to the CIO or the IT organization. You have someone underneath the CIO who is the cybersecurity person, whether that's a CISO or, the manager of cybersecurity or however you do that. And anything that cybersecurity brings up that says, hey, we have a problem. Hey, we want to do this differently. Hey, this isn't really adequate and sufficient to meet our security needs. And the CIO looks at his budget and says, hey, if I raise that up, they're just going to tell me to fix that with no more budget. And that's going to pull money away from important business, rolling out the next application, doing the next business support thing. And overall, that's just going to make me look bad, right? It's going to make my job a lot harder. So that we don't really want to know that. And one of the organizational things I advise to large companies is you really need to think about breaking your cybersecurity chain of command out from your IT chain of command. When I first came to this, I thought, man, CISO should work for the CIO. That's where there's a natural marriage there, et cetera. What over the course of the last decade, I've decided that the conflict of interest piece of having cybersecurity work for the CIO is more of a downside than the collaborative piece of being a part of the IT organization. I actually favor having the cybersecurity piece broken out and working for some other part of the organization. Generally not working directly for the CEO. That probably something that the CEO doesn't have a lot of time for. But perhaps the chief legal officer, office of general counsel, chief risk officer, depending on how your board and your company is formulated, I think that is better for the health of the system and making sure that real cybersecurity concerns can get raised to appropriate level and we can have great risk-based conversations about this. And the CIO has the opportunity to say, well, I don't have budget to fix that. We're going to have a negotiation about this, because if I just take that out of my existing budget to solve whatever problem has been raised, that's going to impact other activities. And, we need to think about how we're doing it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. It's that healthy tension that you set up there between the different parts of the organization versus all being under one sphere and marking your own homework kind of thing, which generally doesn't end well, because you're always making trade-offs there, like you say, to not make yourself look bad there.
Yeah, it's really, it puts the CIO in a really hard spot. I've seen that. And it's not that CIOs are bad or don't want to do this or don't want to do security or anything like that. They end up getting squeezed, right? Between senior C-suites that don't necessarily want to hear that you need more investment, and the realities of having to protect the organization. In that same vein, right, a lot of times I see that the CIO is in turn working for the CFO. Generally, that telegraphs to me that the company considers information technology to be something that I just want to control the costs on. And in the modern IT information age context, that doesn't seem to be a really good approach to me. But there are a lot of companies out there that do that.
So we've already dove into kind of where you're at now and your consultancy practice side of things. So just taking a little bit of a step back, because in your career in the US Navy, you saw some significant periods of conflict, some significant things. And I believe you were serving during 9/11, and following those tragic events, you played a role at US Central Command. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about your involvement there and how that experience shaped your career and your approach to cybersecurity.
Well, yeah, I was the cryptologist at U.S. Special Operations Command on 9/11. I went across the street to help U.S. Central Command and never left, ended up being transferred to U.S. Central Command and staying there. I worked in their Joint Intelligence Center there at U.S. Central Command. And one of the things about the Navy cryptologic community, particularly the officer community, a little bit small, right? We all kind of know each other. So it was easier for me than it might have been in some other branches to be able to plug in there, because there were 3 or 4 other grippies already at U.S. Central Command. I was really lucky to be there at that time. I find myself, that was the heart of the maelstrom post the 9/11 attacks in the United States. I was at U.S. Central Command. I was in their intelligence center, and then I was also at one point in charge of intelligence collections for the operations on the ground. It was funny. I rolled in there the first day. Hey, my boss sent me over here to help. What am I going to do? Well, we need you to do cryptologic analysis in support of targeting operations. And of course, nobody had been looking at Afghanistan prior to 9/11. On 9/10, Afghanistan was a black hole from a U.S. intelligence community perspective. Nobody had spent any time on it at all. And so I said, well, what am I analyzing? They said, we don't know, but you're briefing the general in the morning. Get hot. So yeah, I was extraordinarily lucky. I had my previous 2 tours had been with the National Security Agency, and then we talked about with Hill. I was able to, I knew a lot of people, and then I also knew from a special forces perspective, I'd been the deputy program manager intelligence, buying cryptologic gear for ground special forces teams worldwide. I knew those captains and warrant officers that were, putting their brown suits on and getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan. They knew me, right? And so one of the things I was able to do, happenstance, not planned really, was bridge the gap between some of the national intelligence community piece and those ground special forces intelligence professionals that were actually putting their boots on the ground in Afghanistan. Have them call me, I need, me turn around and call people I know they need, and put those 2 things together in a way that one DC intelligence command and control organization sent me a going away gift that was Fair Winds and Following Seas VinceCom, because I had repeatedly broken the chain of command. We didn't send all these requests to DC and wait for them to adjudicate them and then bring them, come back down. No. Really, I called the person who was doing this and said, hey, I need, and I got, we had some very exciting explosions when certain senior people in DC got cut out of the loop on these things. But it was post 9/11, and I was able to get away with it. So it was a really interesting time for me, being able to do that from a technology perspective as well. Using those cryptologic capabilities in order to look for bad guys.
And obviously, there's a lot of things going on there. Very short space of time. You said, you're going from an area of the world that was effectively an information black hole from your perspective into actually being able to gather intelligence there. What things happened in those processes that have changed the way we think about intelligence gathering and going through these things today?
Well, one of the things that I think this is very much part of the public narrative, right, was this major theater war to counterinsurgency sort of approach, right? So the tools and outlook and systems that I might use for a major theater war maybe are not optimized for that individual counterinsurgency, trying to find a terrorist sort of approach, right? And so we're sort of making that shift. And then now we find ourselves having to shift back as we look at China, Russia, Iran, Middle East, all of these, major military conflicts that are going on. An intelligence system optimized for counterinsurgency, counterterrorism operations maybe has some gaps and seams for major theater war conflicts where we haven't done that in 20 years. So I think that at that time it was about retooling for a counterterrorism sort of fight. And now we're moving in the other direction to say, hey, we need to open back up again and really look at this as maybe we did in the 80s, right? As a major theater war contingency is really our biggest threat.
And you mentioned there that you've worked with different agencies, the National Security Agency, and all these different organizations within the US. I've heard you mention before that you've ended up picking up the phone to the FBI as well on multiple occasions and getting involved in responding to certain cybersecurity breaches. Maybe you could share a little bit about some of those instances and how you became involved in them.
Yeah, in post-retirement, I learned that having a relationship with my local law enforcement around cyber was valuable. And so somewhere along the way there, I decided that, no, I need to, wherever I go, I work to understand who is my local cyber FBI agent, right? Who is that person? Hey, can we do something with that person? Can we meet? Can we have them over for a briefing? Can we do something? So that if I need help there, right? So now that I'm out and I'm a regular old civilian, I can't reach back into the basement of NSA and get what I want. I have to find other ways to do that. And really the FBI, domestically in the United States, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to a certain extent, the Secret Service, have responsibility for cyber crimes. Local law enforcement really isn't the place that's going to help you, particularly when you have international hackers, attacking your system or doing something, ransomware gangs, whatever those things are. So I have tried to cultivate that where I have a relationship there so that I can call them and they answer the phone, right? And if I start from a cold start post-incident, we've got all kinds of bad things going on. I'm like, man, maybe I should tell the FBI about this. Where do I start? Well, that's probably not the time to start. Laying that groundwork ahead of time, I think, is better. So probably what kicked that off was I had the FBI call us when I was working for a Fortune 50 and say, you've got a problem. And it turned out the FBI was wrong. They had identified the wrong company. And so we went to general quarters and did that. And then we had to go back to the FBI and say, well, thanks for your interest in national security, but we think you should probably look over there. That led me to this. Let's have a better relationship there before that cold call occurs. I've been called by the FBI. You have a problem 3 different times. One of those was that time that they were wrong. The other 2 times they weren't wrong. They are conducting, and I think you see this in the UK as well, right? So you have law enforcement who are conducting cybersecurity law enforcement investigations, sometimes internationally. They're looking at the infrastructure that is calling this, and maybe they see that you're hacked and you don't know it yet, right? And they will at times notify companies and say, hey, you really need to look at this thing because I think you got a problem there. It's completely collateral to their investigation, but they're just trying to protect, legitimate businesses in the country of origin. So having that phone a friend opportunity, I think, is really good. In the United States, we have a organization called InfraGard, which is a public-private partnership with the FBI. I'm the deputy sector chief for their defense industrial base sector nationally. And the idea is really to foster those relationships and that communication. There is some threat intelligence that comes out of that. They have a portal, they send threat intelligence stuff out. There's FBI, NSA, Secret Service, DHS, all send stuff out that is for public consumption. We have a tiered system of how releasable that information is in the United States called the Traffic Light Protocol, that sort of should guide us on how we handle that information when we receive it. I think the threat intelligence information, that's another place where I see a lot of companies, paying to consume threat intelligence and don't have the people power needed to really turn that into useful information that, decreases the risk in their organization. Threat intelligence can be very powerful for that, but only if you use it and you have a process for using it. And if you don't have a process for using it, it's probably not that powerful.
Yeah. I mean, it's genuinely refreshing to have a guest on the podcast who's proactively reaching out to the FBI and working with them. We've had a number on the podcast who've been arrested by the FBI previously. So it's nice to see someone on the other side of the fence there working proactively with them.
That has not happened to me. We hope to avoid that. That's not.
Well, fingers crossed for you there. But one of the things he did mention there, actually, and it's part of that transition story of that, it strikes me you've served 21 years there. You've had access to all these systems, information, like you say, being able to reach into the basement of the NSA and find out information as you want it. So that must have been quite a cultural shift to, as you move from offense to defense, but also lose access to some of those resources and contacts? Obviously, you're fostering some of them there through those FBI connections and other things there. How did you find that transitionary period, and what did you do to kind of think about reskilling yourself into the civilian sector, or was it just a natural transition?
It certainly wasn't natural. I think I actually spent a lot of time talking to veterans who are retiring. Not as much now. 4 or 5 years ago, I had a bunch of my peers who were getting out. I was having phone calls very regularly, but after 14 years, heck, people I didn't know are in the back half of their career already. So, look, the transition was not natural. The military mindset is different from the commercial business mindset at times. The biggest thing that I talk about, and I think is significant, is culture. So the military has a culture, but we also have a Navy culture, and then we have a cryptologic community culture as well. And so I might argue that the surface Navy culture is different than the air, the pilot Navy culture, right? That's one that everybody kind of gets right away, right? So you have these bins of different cultures. In particular for military transitioners, I was a little different because as a cryptologist, I did so many joint, combined, multi-agency, things. At one point in time, I was writing evaluations in like 8 different systems: the U.S. Army evaluation system, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Marine Corps, the National Security Agency system, other government intelligence agency systems, the GCHQ system, the Royal Air Force system. I think that covered. That was 8. Yeah, so I literally had all those people, and I was writing their evaluations in 8 different systems. And it was fascinating to me to see they're all military. We all have kind of a general military job that we have to get done, in the different cultural approaches that each of those bins had in how they accomplished that mission. And that in some cases, what was culturally very normal in one, making somebody do push-ups when they got something wrong, U.S. Army, in another culture was like a firing offense, right? Oh my God, you made Seaman Timmy do push-ups? So some of the civilian sides of the house were like, oh my gosh, that person should be thrown out. The Army guys like, no, we do this all the time. This is the way this is very much a part of the Army culture. And it was really eye-opening for me. And then moving forward, learning to operate in different cultures. So from a transition perspective, and I advise people, particularly when they've worked in one company for a really long time, and then they want to go to another company, same problem. The culture could be very different. And that can be hard for people to, one, realize that it's a problem. Many people don't even know that this is a thing. Navy surface warfare guy who does nothing but Navy surface warfare and commands a cruiser and then retires. We got to talk, because this culture you've grown up in, that's not the way the rest of the world works. So you need to be very sensitive to what is the culture in whatever organization you're going to go. And that's going to vary even from company to company. It's not like all civilian cultures are the same. Well, there's civilian culture, and then there's Procter & Gamble culture, right? And then there might be, Procter & Gamble at this particular manufacturing plant. You got to be sensitive to the cultures at those different organizations. Again, a people issue.
And you made that transition very successfully. You went on to work at various companies, PricewaterhouseCoopers, lots of big companies there. But then at some point you decided that you wanted to start your own company. So tell us a little bit about how you came to found Defense Cybersecurity Group.
Yeah, I've thought that entrepreneurship is probably really the way to be successful, economically, financially, etc. It is higher risk, higher reward. It was not I didn't study entrepreneurship as a 10-year-old. That wasn't where I thought I was going to end up, right? But I did look at that and say that I thought that this was a way to be successful, a way to cover my family. Really, I talk about this as the primary reason I'm doing this is to make sure that my family is covered and taken care of, and then as many people as I can hire, and I can provide a company that's a good place to work for them, and they're sheltered, and their kids are going to school, and I can take care of them. I'm winning, right? That's really what this is about for me. But I decided that was probably the best way to do that and be successful in sort of the modern age. I think, now we're getting into big picture cultural 21st century. How does Gen Z have it? What's it going to be like for Gen A? A lot of talks about how hard it is to buy a house in the United States today, and blah, blah, blah. So that's one of the pieces of advice I give my kids, which is, hey, if you really want to make it, right, and have a level of affluence and be able to, support yourself and your families going forward, I think entrepreneurship is a fabulous way to do that. It does have risks.
Well, of course. And I think there's probably quite a lot you've taken from your Navy background there in how you approach risks and how you manage situations that will lead to you actually being very successful in the kind of entrepreneurial space, as you already have been. So it's really interesting to see there. And it isn't, my understanding from reading the information about you and your company is it isn't just a way of making money, that you actually have, a mission behind the company that really matters to you. So could you tell us a little bit about that mission and what you're trying to do with the company?
Well, of course, I'm coming from the defense world, right? One of the things that I really, really, really hate is we have other countries, criminals, etc., attacking and destroying particularly small businesses, right? But even larger businesses, right? So I think 60% of small businesses go out of business after a successful hack or ransomware attack. They can't afford to lose a payroll. They're done, right? If somebody steals the next payroll, their bandwidth isn't that deep. And that's maybe just 10 people, et cetera, but those are 10 people's livelihoods and jobs and kids going to school and all that. I really, really hate that. Right. We layer on top of that from a defense industrial base perspective, right? We have other nation states, cyber warfare activities, very active out there in trying to steal intellectual property, the readout of that battle station, weapon systems plans, et cetera. A ton of that puts the nation at risk as well. And so that's a place where my company is really focused right now, which is how do we better secure the defense industrial base? We work strongly there's a compliance aspect to this. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I try to do is influence the Department of Defense to make that. I think the compliance aspect is important, but we can't go overboard on that. We can't drive too many companies out of the defense industrial base. We can't make this too hard, or that becomes counterproductive. I think there's a balance to be had in that. And I care about our country in the Western world, and defending those principles that I think have really are some of the best ways to live in the world. Having been out there in the desert and, been to Afghanistan and been to Iraq and, been to Somalia, and, there's a lot of places that aren't this good. And so we need to appreciate what we have, and we need to take action to defend that.
And part of the things I mentioned right at the start, and I've seen you talk about on your company website, is the need for real-world security that goes beyond just compliance and often cutting through the complexity of compliance mandates and regulations out there. So I was interested, what do you think are some of the common traps or misconceptions that organizations fall into when they're thinking about compliance and regulation and frameworks that are out there?
Well, one of the problems that we have in the compliance framework arena today is that it's very complex and it's growing, and we have different regulatory agencies putting out more and more guidance, because this cyber thing is really important, and those things aren't all synchronized, and that's creating a lot of burden in the commercial space to try and chase. SEC has got regulations, DHS has got regulations, DoD has got regulations, HIPAA. We're getting a lot of different cybersecurity regulations now, and so synchronizing those is a challenge. I don't know that that's a trap that companies fall into, but it is a challenge. I think the perhaps the biggest trap that companies fall into is that this is the CISO and the CIO's job. Just go take care of it. It's at cyber in the world. That means it's technical. You guys do it. And really, this is a business problem, right? So let's take our defense industrial base and protecting the plans for the Joint Strike Fighter or whatever. Well, that's based around the sensitive information that the DoD and some of the big contractors are sharing with other contractors. Hey, I got to give you the plans to build the landing gear for the F-35, right? And if I get the plans for the landing gear here and the wing over there and the engine over here, then I can put all that together and I essentially have the entire plan. This is a business problem. When I look at this, we have to understand, well, where am I getting that sensitive information? Where is that coming in? IT doesn't know the answer to that question. They've built servers and stuff and handed it over to operations, and they don't think about it unless operations complains because it's broken. What they're putting on that server or how they're managing that information on it, they are not paying attention to that. That is not their job. That is Ops' job. And in order to control and protect the sensitive information that is my company's intellectual property or somebody else's intellectual property or the government's sensitive information, I kind of got to know where that is. And just protect everything doesn't work. It is not a plan for success. We know this in the cybersecurity community. We talk about crown jewels. It's been a part of the dialogue for a number of years. But we're still acting like, oh yeah, just protect everything is the way to go. Both in the regulations, right, in the way government regulators are applying this and the way business people think about this. And then you look at the CISO is like, how the heck am I supposed to do that? Because I don't even know what I don't know, right? I had a conversation with the CIO yesterday who was like, yeah, I haven't seen any of those contracts. I have no idea. Well, okay. Well, we need to couple our cybersecurity technical piece with the information management, information governance. How does that stuff flow across my organization so that we can put the technical controls where we need them and protect that? And just protect all of everything equally means that you're probably doing a crappy job of protecting everything.
And is that the way you would advise an organization to think about reframing it so they're going beyond compliance, actually thinking about actual real world security problems that they need to solve for?
In the context of information governance. So, and we talk about this to a certain extent academically in cybersecurity. What do I need to protect? That's a business question, right? Let's understand that. We can then we can build security architectures. We can do that technical thing to protect that. If we understand what do we need to protect, and that is not at one point in time. That is a process that's ongoing. Hey, because I'm always getting new contracts. What data is changing? I've got a new project, all integrated with that business process. And too often the business does not want to participate in that. And
one of the things that I often find businesses sort of struggle with really is that they worry about, emerging technologies. We're moving to cloud. We've got this IoT thing with, 5G connection, all these kind of new challenges that are out there. But the thing I often talk about, and sort of shout out to Raymond Chen here, is security being the old new thing. And it's the thing you talked about at the start, where there's some fundamental physics of computing and cybersecurity that largely remain unchanged. Principles like least privilege that were outlined in the good old DoD rainbow books and timeless concepts like that. What do you think some of these timeless concepts, principles, or guidance are that you'd advise people to think about today to improve their organization's security posture? What are people overlooking?
Boy, I think you phrased it well. There's a tendency to follow the shiny ball of new technology, AI probably being the biggest one out there today, versus the concepts of fundamental blocking and tackling. So what are some of the fundamental blocking and tackling things? Least privilege, access control, right? How do we do access control, particularly two-factor as a part of that, right? Vulnerability scanning and patching. Most people don't realize how hard that is. Just patch your systems, right? We always, well, why didn't they just patch their systems? Well, actually, because that's really hard. It's way harder than it sounds. It's not like it works on your laptop where Microsoft just says, yeah, we downloaded patches and you're all good and everything works fine. That's not the way that usually goes from a corporate infrastructure perspective. Detection is a miss, right, in the space. I feel like, although there are detection systems out there, we don't generally have a detection and response process where I'm looking for bad things in my network and then I'm responding to those bad things. Sort of a broken windows policing approach. I am a huge believer in broken windows policing. Most incident response plans are designed around the big one. I've gotten ransomware that has brought the entire company down. My incident response, in my view, actually needs to be focused on the small one. John clicked the link and it downloaded malware and the antivirus didn't clean it up or didn't clean it up completely. And we got to go fix that. But if you never fix those, that hygiene piece of that degrades over time. Broken windows policing. Go address small problems before they become big problems.
Yeah, it's very much the sort of shift left thing, isn't it, of breaking something as early in the attack chain as possible, dealing with those early incidents, because the only reason you're going to get that major incident you've got a plan for is if all those early stages have been allowed to succeed.
Have been allowed to succeed. And there is a lot of this that happens in human speed, right? Because normally we're seeing hackers access a system. It might be months before they pivot on that access, probably selling that access on the marketplace because you've got actors out there today who their job is to get access and get people to click the link and get endpoints and then decide, well, this is, Procter & Gamble and this is PwC and this is a hospital system at blah, blah, blah. And I can put these out on the dark web and I'm going to sell those for however many dollars, $100 a piece. And then that person gets those and then they're trying them. And so then 3 months later, now they're on your network. They've got a backdoor access and they're starting to pivot and do something else. Hey, if we clean up John's computer within the first 72 hours after that, we've really mitigated our risk. I think there's
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think those kind of little incidents, and there's often the culture as well of, just blame the user. The user was stupid. They shouldn't have done these things, but well, we need some controls in place. We need some user education. There's all these things we can start to think about instead of just blaming the user, of starting to think about what were the things that allowed us to get to this place in the first place.
People are going to click the link. I ran at a major, Fortune 100 company, the implementation of the phishing training. And, the first time we ran the phishing training, the click rate was like 60%. After 7 or 8 months, we had that down in the 4% range, but we really struggled to push it below 4%. And 4% is a win for the bad guys, right? Because they're going to send out 100 emails, and if I get 4, I'd rather get 60, right? That makes my job even easier. But if I get 4, I'm probably still winning. So we need to, it's certainly worth doing, going from 60% to 4%, but there's an aspect of it that you're always going to have to respond to. And responding to the little ones, I think, is super important.
We're almost out of time here today, but I just wanted a couple of final questions. So what advice would you give to someone who's interested in entering the field of cybersecurity today, either as a young person starting their career, someone transitioning out of the military looking for new career opportunities? What would you say to them to get into the field of cybersecurity?
Don't be intimidated by how complex it is. I see young people thinking about this, or people particularly trying to transition a career. Well, there's people who have 20 years or 30 years of career experience in this. How am I going to be able to compete with that? This space reinvents itself every 2 to 5 years. If you dive in and take the approach, I'm going to make myself the expert, in 2 years, you'll be pretty good. And in 5 years, you will be an expert because stuff changes. I also see people who are still doing the way we did it 10 years ago. I've been doing this in the same way for 10 years, particularly in government. Well, then you're probably doing it wrong because a lot of changes happened in the last 10 years. This is not where we were at in 2013. So, why don't you get with the modern age, because this stuff changes. So don't be intimidated by how complex it is or depth of experience for other people or whatever. Make yourself an expert. That doesn't mean that I need to spend $100,000 on a new degree per se. I think certifications are great. And I think that self-study, hey, I'm going to make myself, is probably more important than either degrees or certifications. I had a young person who works for us. She was a philosophy and environmental science major, graduated from college 2 or 3 years ago, had been working for a not-for-profit, not able to make ends meet. We hired her as an apprentice tech writer. Right. So a lot of policies and procedures need to be written in the space. We got to have somebody who can put coherent sentences together. A lot of times technical people aren't so great at that, nor do they like to do that. She was a good writer. We put her in the space. But she just passed her certified professional test after taking the course for the DoD certification for their cybersecurity. And one of the things that she did was she was writing out each control in what she called the plain English version, right? Here's what it says. Okay, I'm going to ask people, what does this really mean? I don't understand how a firewall works, etc. But she took the initiative to write that herself. And then after the test, she came back and said, man, that was where I really learned, was making myself go through and understand each one and write it down myself. So that was an example of her making herself more of an expert, not because somebody told her she had to, or it was part of the certification program or whatever. She did that herself.
And I'm going to guess that that's the same lady who wrote the CMMC Myths blog on your website, which does a fantastic job.
That is true, that she is the same person who did that.
Yeah, well, I'd highly recommend if you have a look at the cybersecgiu.com website. There's blogs on there, and there's some great things of breaking down some of the myths and misconceptions around some of these areas and certifications. So, yeah, fantastic job by her there in doing those things. So great to see.
I will tell her you said that.
Yeah, perfect. And finally, let's look forward a bit. So, what things are you most hopeful about in the realm of cybersecurity in the next decade or so?
I'm hopeful that AI is going to mature to the point where it can do a better job of eliminating false positives in the alerts in the detection process. We still have a lot of problems with that. There are approaches to mitigate those problems and et cetera, but lower the false positive rate without raising the false negative rate. The false negative rate being, I didn't detect something I should have. In a lot of approaches today, I can get rid of all the false positives, but my false negative rate goes through the roof, right? So I'm not hearing about bad things that are happening. I am really hopeful that AI is going to be able to help us in a big way with that.
The good old receiver operator curve. thing going on there of trading off the air. I like to see your background coming into play there with that final point. So really appreciate that. And thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed our conversation. Like I said at the start, I think we've only scratched the surface of some of the things that you've been involved in your career, but really appreciate you joining us today and sharing those. So that's all we have time for today on this episode of Adventures of Alice and Bob. A huge thanks to our guest today, Vincent Scott. It's been really fascinating learning about some of the events and the activities that have shaped your career, and learn about the mission that you're on at the Defense Cybersecurity Group as well, and your thoughts for the future as well, which are very nice to hear and positive. As always, thanks to our super producer, Ben Kramer, and the team at Beyond Trust who make this podcast happen. I'm James Maud, and this has been Adventures of Alice and Bob.